The space station hummed with nervous energy as dozens of Earth soldiers stood in perfect formation, waiting for their alien visitor. The metal walls reflected harsh white lights that made everything look cold and unwelcoming. Admiral Kim paced, near the entrance checking her watch every few seconds, knowing that this meeting would decide whether humanity lived or died in the coming war. Commander Yaek stepped through the airlock with the confidence of someone who had conquered 100 worlds. His purple skin gleamed under the bright lights, and his 3 yellow eyes swept across the assembled humans with obvious disgust. The alien stood nearly 8 feet tall with muscles that bulged even through his advanced combat armor. Every step he took made a metallic clanking sound that echoed through the silent chamber. The Galactic Federation had sent their finest warrior to evaluate Earth forces for the war against the Void Swarm. These cosmic horrors were devouring entire star systems and turning living beings into mindless creatures that served only destruction. The Federation needed every possible ally, but they also needed to know that their new partners would not become liabilities in the heat of battle. Jack looked at the first human soldier, a young man named Kyung, who had trained for months just to be here. The alien commander did not even speak, just made a dismissive gesture with his massive hand before moving to the next person in line. The message was, clear this human was too weak to be worth his time. Private Minho stepped forward next, his chest puffed out with pride at being selected for this historic meeting. He had graduated top of his class and could bench press twice his body weight. But Yaek barely glanced at him before shaking his head and moving on. The alien translator device spoke in a mechanical voice that hurt human ears. Your species disappoints me, Commander Yaek announced loud enough for everyone to hear. These soft creatures cannot even lift their own body weight properly. How do you expect them to fight enemies that can tear through steel with their bare hands? The Federation made a mistake coming to this primitive world. Several soldiers shifted uncomfortably, but maintained their positions. They had been warned that the alien commander might be difficult to work with. Earth needed the Federation technology and weapons so badly that they were willing to endure almost any insult. The political situation was delicate, and everyone understood the stakes. Admiral Kim felt her jaw clench as she watched Yaek dismiss soldier after soldier without giving them a fair chance. The alien was making judgments based on appearance alone, not bothering to test their skills or learn about their training. She wanted to intervene but knew that challenging the commander directly could ruin everything. Near the back of the formation, Master Chief Daypark watched the proceedings with calm eyes that missed nothing. 20 years of military service had taught him patience, but he could see where this was heading. The alien was not here to find worthy allies. He was here to prove that humans were inferior and did not deserve Federation support. Jack continued his inspection, growing more vocal with each dismissal. Your weapons are crude, your armor is paper-thin, and your bodies are fragile, he declared while examining a rifle that looked like a toy in his massive hands. The Void Swarm will eat you alive before you can even scream for help. The alien commander picked up a standard-issue combat helmet and crushed it between his fingers like it was made of aluminum foil. The demonstration sent a clear message about what he thought of human military equipment. Several young soldiers looked pale, but Day noticed that the older veterans remained stone-faced. I have fought the Void Swarm on 17 different worlds. Yak continued his voice, carrying the authority of hard-won experience. I have seen entire armies of trained warriors turn and run when they first encounter these cosmic nightmares. Your people have never faced anything more dangerous than each other, Admiral. Kim stepped forward, carefully choosing her words. The Federation needs to understand that humans may look different from your people, but we have our own strengths, she said diplomatically. We have survived on a world full of predators and natural disasters. We know how to adapt and overcome. Yak laughed, a harsh sound that made several humans wince, visibly. "Survival instincts mean nothing against the Void Swarm," he replied. "They do not hunt like normal predators. They consume everything in their path, turning matter itself into more of themselves. Your entire planet could become part of them within days." The alien commander moved deeper into the formation, dismissing more soldiers with barely a glance. He seemed to take pleasure in their obvious disappointment and growing desperation. Earth military leadership had selected their absolute best fighters for this evaluation, yet none of them seemed worthy in the alien eyes. Lieutenant Sung tried to demonstrate his marksmanship skills by hitting a target from across the room, but Yaek just shook his head. "Our basic training. Weapons are more accurate than your best sniper rifles," the alien said coldly. "Your technology is centuries behind what the Void Swarm has already consumed and adapted to use against us." Day remained motionless as the alien commander approached his section of the formation. He had seen this kind of arrogance before in his career, usually from officers who had never actually seen real combat. The difference was that this time the arrogant commander had the power to doom his entire species. When Yaek finally reached Day, the alien stopped and studied the human more carefully than the others. Perhaps it was something in the Master Chief posture or the way his eyes never looked away, but the commander seemed to sense something different about this particular soldier. Another soft human, Yaek announced, but his voice carried less certainty than before. "You people cannot even handle conflicts on your own planet, yet you think you can fight cosmic horrors that have destroyed civilizations, millions of years old." The alien leaned closer, bringing his face down to Day level. The room went completely silent as every person present understood they were witnessing a crucial moment. Admiral Kim held her breath, knowing that Day reputation for not backing down from anyone regardless of rank or species. The political implications made her want to intervene, but she also knew that any weakness shown here could be fatal. "Your species is pathetic," Yaek continued, his three eyes fixed on Day face. "You hide behind your primitive technology and call yourselves warriors, but you have never faced real danger. The Void Swarm will teach you what fear truly means before they consume your world." Day looked up at the alien commander without showing any emotion on his weathered face. 20 years of fighting in places most people could not even imagine had taught him to stay calm under pressure. He had faced enemies that most humans would consider nightmares. But something about this alien arrogance bothered him more than usual. "Maybe you should test that theory," Day said quietly, his voice carrying no anger, just cold confidence that seemed to fill the entire room. The simple statement hung in the air like a challenge, making everyone present realized that the dynamic had just shifted in a dangerous direction. Jeek's three eyes widened slightly at the human boldness. No one had dared to challenge him directly since he had arrived on Earth. The alien had expected fear, submission, or at least respectful silence, but instead he was facing someone who seemed completely unimpressed by his size, strength, or reputation. Without warning, Yaek's massive hand shot forward like a striking snake, his palm connected with Dae's face with enough force to send most beings flying across the room. The sound echoed through the chamber like a gunshot, making several people jump in surprise and fear. But something impossible happened. Dae barely moved from the impact. His head turned slightly to absorb the force, then slowly came back to face the alien commander. A thin line of blood appeared at the corner of his mouth, which he wiped away with the back of his hand, before looking directly back at Yaek. The room held its breath as human and alien stared at each other, neither one backing down or showing weakness. The tension was so thick it felt like the air itself might explode at any moment. Everyone present knew they were witnessing something that would be remembered for years to come. Commander Yaek stared at the human in complete confusion and growing alarm. His powerful strike should have sent the small Earth warrior flying across the room, or at least left him unconscious on the metal floor. Instead, this strange human stood, perfectly still with blood trickling from his lip like nothing important had happened. The alien commander had fought warriors from dozens of different species across the galaxy. He knew exactly how much force his enhanced muscles could generate, and he had used enough power to crush the skull of most beings. Yet this human had absorbed the impact without even taking a step backward. Impressive for a primitive creature, Yayak admitted while flexing his massive fingers that still tingled from the unexpected impact, but physical toughness alone will not save your pathetic species from what is coming for you. The void swarm consumes entire solar systems, turning every living thing into mindless extensions of their collective horror around. The room, other soldiers watched the confrontation with fascination and barely controlled fear. They had all heard stories about Master Chief Day Park, but seeing him stand toe-to-toe with an 8-foot-tall alien warrior was something none of them had expected to witness in their military careers. The alien commander began pacing around Day like a predator circling its prey, his heavy boots making metallic sounds against the station floor. Your people have never encountered anything like the void swarm. He continued his voice, carrying the weight of terrible memories. They are not just enemies. They are a force of nature that turns reality itself against you. Day remained completely motionless, his dark eyes following the alien movements. Without showing any emotion on his weathered face, 20 years of combat experience had taught him to read opponents, and he could see that despite his size and strength, this alien commander was more afraid than he was letting on. Admiral Kim wanted, desperately to intervene before the situation escalated beyond diplomatic repair. But she also understood that this moment would determine whether humanity earned respect or was dismissed as another weak species. The politics were incredibly delicate, and Earth needed Federation support to survive what was coming. I have seen entire armies of trained galactic warriors break and run screaming when they first encounter Void Swarm scouts, Yayak declared while studying the human reactions. Your soldiers will not even make it through basic contact before their minds shatter from the horror of what they are facing. The alien commander stopped directly in front of Day and leaned down until their faces were only inches apart. When the swarm arrives, at your world, they will not simply kill your people, he whispered in a voice that carried barely controlled terror. They will transform every human into something that hungers only for more consumption and growth. Day looked directly into all three of the alien eyes without flinching or showing any sign of intimidation. Your armor looks very expensive, he observed quietly, noting the intricate energy patterns and glowing circuits that covered the commander's massive frame. It probably costs more than our entire military base budget. The casual observation seemed to catch Yayak off guard since he had expected fear or anger rather than simple curiosity. Must be nice having all that advanced protection, Day continued in the same conversational tone that somehow made everyone in the room feel increasingly nervous about what might happen next. Yak laughed harshly, a sound that hurt human ears and made several soldiers visibly wince. This battle armor has protected me through more than 100 combat engagements across 50 different worlds, he said, while pounding his chest proudly, making the advanced materials ring like a massive bell. The energy shields alone can deflect weapon blasts that would vaporize your strongest metals. The alien continued, his voice filled with obvious pride. No primitive human weapon could even scratch the surface, let alone penetrate to cause actual damage. Your technology is simply too crude and underdeveloped. Day nodded thoughtfully as if he was genuinely interested in the technical specifications. Rather than arguing or showing anger, he seemed to be carefully considering everything the alien commander was telling him about Federation military capabilities and protective equipment. That must give you a lot of confidence in dangerous situations, Day said while reaching slowly into his uniform pocket. Every weapon in the room immediately turned toward him as soldiers and security personnel prepared for potential violence, but relaxed. when they saw what he was removing. The object was nothing more threatening than a simple military identification tag hanging from a standard metal chain. It looked completely ordinary, just stamped metal with numbers and letters that meant nothing to most observers. But Admiral Kim's eyes went wide with sudden recognition, and she took an involuntary step backward. Several of the older soldiers who knew about classified military operations also began moving away from the immediate area. Their faces showed a mixture of respect and genuine fear that had nothing to do with the alien commander presence. Something about that simple dog tag was making experienced warriors nervous. "Soldier, state your complete name and rank for our distinguished guest," Admiral Kim said carefully. Her voice controlled but carrying undertones that made every human in the room stand straighter and pay closer attention to what was about to be revealed. "Day Park, Master Chief Petty Officer, United States Navy SEALs," he replied simply, holding the identification tag where everyone could see it clearly. Then, after a pause that seemed to stretch on forever, he continued reading from the metal surface. Unit designation, Ghost Protocol. Classification, redacted. The change in atmosphere was immediate and dramatic. Even maintenance workers stopped what they were doing to stare at the small piece of metal that had somehow transformed the entire mood of the room, from tense confrontation to something approaching genuine terror and awe. Commander Yaek looked around in confusion as he tried to understand why all the humans were suddenly acting so differently. The alien had studied Earth military structure enough to know that Master Chief was a high rank, but he did not comprehend why everyone seemed afraid of this particular soldier. "What exactly is Ghost Protocol?" Yaek demanded, his universal translator struggling with the English terminology and military jargon. Admiral Kim started to explain, but Day held up one finger in a simple gesture that somehow silenced the higher-ranking officer immediately. The fact that a lower-ranked enlisted soldier could quiet a flag officer with nothing more than a hand motion sent chills through the alien commander's spine. Something was very wrong with his understanding of human military hierarchy and chain of command structure. "Ghost Protocol does not exist in any official capacity," Day said quietly, his voice carrying no emotion, but somehow filling the entire room with tension. "We handle problems that cannot be solved through normal military channels, the kind of situations that would make regular people lose their minds just from knowing such things are possible." He paused, letting those words sink in. While studying the alien commander face for signs of understanding, "We deal with threats that make grown admirals wake up screaming in the middle of the night. Things that are so dangerous and classified that acknowledging their existence could cause mass panic across entire populations." Jack felt his three hearts begin beating faster as he processed what he was hearing. The human casual tone made his words even more terrifying than if he had been shouting threats or making dramatic declarations. Around the room, other soldiers continued backing away, giving Day more space as if he might explode without warning. 15 years ago, something crashed in the Pacific Ocean. Day continued, never raising his voice above normal conversation level. Something that was not from Earth, but also was not from any known galactic civilization either. It was spreading a black substance that transformed everything it touched into something else entirely. The alien commander's skin went from deep purple to pale gray as terrible understanding began to dawn. Only a few species in the galaxy knew about early Void Swarm scout missions, and Earth was definitely not supposed to be among those with such classified information. It was spreading fast and turning everything organic into something hungry, Dai said while still holding his dog tag. "The government called us in to handle the situation quietly and permanently. 12 highly trained operators went down in a submarine to investigate and eliminate the threat." His eyes never left Yak's face as he delivered the final devastating revelation, "I am the only one who came back up alive." The identification tag caught the harsh station lighting as Day held it between his fingers, creating small reflections that danced across the metal walls. To most observers, it looked completely ordinary, just another piece of standard military equipment. But Admiral Kim recognition was spreading to other senior officers who understood the implications. The silence in the room grew heavier with each passing second as more people began to realize what they were witnessing. Several maintenance workers had stopped pretending to work and were openly staring at the confrontation between human and alien commander. Their faces showed mixtures of awe and fear that had nothing to do with Yaek's impressive size. Master Chief Park spent 3 days, completely alone at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. Admiral Kim said carefully, choosing each word like she was walking through a minefield. He was fighting creatures that our best scientists still cannot properly classify or understand even after 15 years of study and research. The Admiral paused, looking directly at the alien commander who was beginning to show signs of genuine alarm. Our official reports state that the incident was caused by underwater volcanic activity, she continued. But everyone with sufficient security clearance knows that Master Chief Park destroyed an entire Void Swarm infection site using nothing but standard human weapons. Yaek's powerful legs felt suddenly weak as the full implications of what he was hearing crashed over him like a massive wave. The Void Swarm scouts were nearly indestructible, requiring coordinated attacks from multiple Federation capital ships with their most advanced weapons systems to eliminate even single specimens. The idea that one primitive human had somehow destroyed an entire scout infestation using crude Earth technology seemed completely impossible. Yet the evidence was standing directly in front of him, radiating quiet confidence that was more terrifying than any threat or boast could have been. "That armor you are so proud of," Day said, finally clipping his identification tag back onto his uniform with movements that seemed casual but somehow carried enormous weight. "Would it protect you from something that actually feeds on energy itself? Something that grows stronger every time you attack it with advanced weapons?" The question hung in the air like a physical presence, making everyone in the room uncomfortable. Yaek had seen what happened when Void Swarm creatures encountered high technology. They absorbed it, adapted to it, and used it to become even more dangerous than before. Your Federation fights with energy weapons, plasma cannons, and force shields. Day continued, his voice remaining conversational. Despite discussing topics that gave Galactic military leaders nightmares, all of that just makes the Swarm stronger and more adaptable to future encounters with similar technology. The human warrior began walking slowly around the alien commander, reversing their earlier positions and making Yaek feel like prey being stalked by something far more dangerous than it appeared. "We learned to fight them with fire explosives and kinetic weapons, things that work through simple physics rather than complex technology." Admiral Kim watched the interaction with growing amazement as she realized that their most classified operative was essentially giving the alien commander a free education in anti-Void Swarm tactics. The political implications were staggering, but she also understood that this demonstration might be their only chance to earn Federation respect. "The creatures I fought down there were already adapting to our weapons by the time I encountered them," Day explained while maintaining eye contact with all 3 of Yaek's eyes simultaneously. They had absorbed parts of our submarine and were using our own technology against us in ways we had never imagined possible. Yaek found his voice finally managing to ask the question that was burning in his mind. "How did you survive when 11 other trained warriors did not make it out alive?" The alien desperation to understand was obvious in every word and gesture. Day smiled for the first time since the confrontation began, and it was not a pleasant expression that made several observers take additional steps backward. "I stopped thinking like a civilized being," he said simply. "When you are fighting something that breaks all the rules, you have to be willing to break them." 2. The human continued his slow circuit around the increasingly nervous alien commander. Your people fight wars like chess games with proper tactics, formations, and rules of engagement. We fight wars like knife fights in dark alleys where the only rule is going home alive while your opponent does not. That comparison sent visible shudders through both human and alien observers who were beginning to understand the fundamental difference between civilized warfare and the kind of absolute brutality required to face cosmic horror. The Federation had been approaching the Void Swarm problem completely wrong. I used improvised weapons, environmental hazards, and pure savage determination to eliminate threats that should have been impossible for any individual to handle. Day continued, each word carrying the weight of terrible experience gained through unimaginable circumstances. The alien commander realized that his entire understanding of primitive species was crumbling around him. Everything the Federation had taught about less advanced civilizations being automatically inferior was being destroyed by this single human who had accomplished what entire galactic fleets struggled to achieve. But that was not the most terrifying part, Day said, stopping directly in front of Yaek and looking up into his three eyes. The worst part was realizing that I enjoyed it. When you spend days fighting absolute evil, you start to become something that can match it in ruthlessness and creativity. Admiral Kim felt her blood run cold as she remembered the psychological evaluations that had followed Day's return from the Pacific mission. The reports had been classified at levels so high that only 3 people on Earth were authorized to read them. But she knew enough to understand the implications. The Void Swarm changes everyone who fights it. Day continued, his voice carrying undertones that made experienced soldiers nervous. They either break you completely, or they turn you into something that can hunt them effectively. There is no middle ground in that kind of warfare. Jack stared at the human with growing horror and fascination as he began to truly comprehend what kind of being was standing before him. This was not just a primitive warrior. This was something that had been forged in combat against the galaxy's most feared enemy and had emerged victorious through methods that civilized minds could barely comprehend. You do not fight like any civilized species I have encountered, the alien, Commander said slowly, and for the first time in their conversation, it sounded like a compliment rather than an insult. You fight exactly like the Void Swarm itself, using whatever methods work, regardless of rules, ethics, or conventional tactical. Doctrine Day nodded, once accepting the observation as simple fact. When you are facing an enemy that wants to consume your entire reality, you learn to use every possible advantage, he replied. The Federation has been trying to fight them with superior technology and tactics, but what you really need is superior ruthlessness. The room remained silent as everyone present absorbed the implications of what they were witnessing. This was not just a confrontation between human and alien. This was a fundamental shift in how the galactic community would need to approach their greatest existential threat. The civilized galaxy was about to learn warfare from their most primitive allies. Commander Yaek felt his 3 hearts beating faster as the full weight of what he was hearing crashed down on him like a collapsing building. The human casual tone made every word more terrifying than if he had been screaming threats or making dramatic declarations of war. Around the chamber, other soldiers were continuing to back away from Master Chief Park, giving him more space as if he might suddenly transform into something dangerous without warning. Even the maintenance staff had abandoned their workstations and were watching the confrontation with expressions of mixed awe and fear. The thing that crashed in the Pacific was not just any ordinary threat. Day continued, his voice never rising above normal conversation levels, but somehow filling the entire room with tension. It was one of their scout units sent ahead to prepare Earth for full-scale invasion and consumption. Jake's skin went from pale gray to almost white, as terrible understanding began to dawn in his alien mind only. The highest levels of Federation command knew about Void Swarm, advanced reconnaissance missions, and Earth was definitely not supposed to have any knowledge of such classified galactic intelligence. The black substance was spreading faster. Then our scientists could study it. Admiral Kim added, her voice carefully controlled, but carrying undertones that made every human present stand straighter. Our best estimates suggested that it would consume the entire Pacific Basin within 72 hours, if left unchecked. The alien commander stared at the Admiral in growing horror as he realized the true scope of what these primitive humans had faced alone, without any galactic support or advanced technology. A single scout unit infestation could theoretically consume an entire planet if given enough time to establish itself. 12 of our most highly trained special operations personnel went down in a nuclear submarine to investigate and eliminate the threat, Day said, while still holding his identification tag like it was the most natural thing in the world. The official mission parameters were simple: find it and destroy it completely. Yaik found himself leaning forward despite his fear as he tried to understand how primitive humans could have possibly succeeded where galactic fleets often failed. What kind of weapons did you use against creatures that can absorb and adapt to most forms of energy-based attacks? He asked desperately. We started with conventional explosives and kinetic weapons, Day replied with the same calm tone he had maintained throughout their entire conversation. But the creatures adapted quickly, learning to predict and counter our standard tactics within the first few hours of engagement. The human warrior began walking slowly around the chamber, his boots making soft sounds against the metal flooring that seemed unnaturally loud in the tense silence. As the mission progressed, we had to become increasingly creative with our approach to the problem, Admiral. Kim remembered reading the classified after-action reports that had given her nightmares for months afterward. The methods described in those documents had pushed the boundaries of what civilized military forces considered acceptable even in desperate circumstances. By the second day, we were using improvised weapons made from submarine components, environmental hazards, and psychological warfare tactics against creatures that were not supposed to have minds capable of experiencing fear or confusion. Day continued, his voice carrying undertones of terrible memories. The alien commander felt his legs growing weaker as he tried to imagine what kind of horrors these humans had faced in the depths of their own ocean. The Void Swarm Scouts were known to be nearly invulnerable, requiring massive orbital bombardments from capital ships to eliminate. But that was when we discovered their weakness, Day said, stopping directly in front of Yaik and looking up into his. Three eyes with an expression that made the 8-foot-tall warrior want to step backward. They could adapt to technology and energy, but they struggled with pure unpredictability. What do you mean by unpredictability? Yaik asked, though part of him was afraid to hear the answer. The Federation military doctrine emphasized careful planning, coordinated attacks, and predictable tactical formations that had served them well for centuries against conventional enemies. I mean complete chaos, Day replied, with a smile that did not reach his eyes. When fighting something that can learn from your patterns, you have to abandon all patterns and become something that operates outside logical parameters. Entirely, Admiral Kim watched the alien commander, face grow paler as he began to understand the implications of what the Master Chief was describing. The Federation had been trying to fight the Void Swarm using civilized military tactics against an enemy that required savage creativity. I spent the final day alone after my team was killed using methods that our own psychologists cannot properly classify, Day continued. Each encounter required me to think like the creatures themselves, completely abandoning human morality and conventional, tactical doctrine. The room remained silent as everyone present tried to imagine what that kind of combat must have been like, fighting an enemy that could adapt to your weapons while being trapped underwater with limited resources and no possibility of retreat or reinforcement. I used parts of dead creatures as camouflage, environmental toxins as weapons, and pure psychological manipulation against beings that were not supposed to have individual consciousness. Day explained, his voice carrying the weight of experiences that no human should have to endure. Jack stared at the human with a mixture of horror, fascination, and growing respect as he realized what kind of transformation combat against the Void Swarm had produced. This was not just a primitive warrior. This was something that had been forged in the fires of absolute necessity. The official report states that I eliminated the entire infestation site using controlled demolitions of underwater thermal vents, Day continued. But the classified versions describe methods that made our own command structure question whether I was still entirely human afterward. Admiral Kim felt cold sweat forming on her forehead as she remembered the psychological evaluations that had followed Day return to the surface. The reports had been sealed at classification levels so high that acknowledging their existence was itself a federal crime. When I finally surfaced after 3 days, the rescue teams found me floating unconscious, surrounded by debris that our scientists still cannot properly identify, Day said while clipping his dog tag back onto his uniform. The creatures were gone, but so was everything else in a 50-mile radius. The alien commander realized that his hands were shaking as he tried to process what he was hearing. A single human had accomplished what required multiple Federation battle groups working in coordination with orbital support and massive resource expenditures. That armor you wear would not have helped you down there, Day observed quietly. The creatures would have used its energy output to track you, adapted to its defensive systems, and eventually turned your own protection into a weapon against you. Yaek looked down at his advanced battlesuit with new understanding, suddenly seeing it not as protection, but as a potential liability against enemies that could transform any advantage into a weakness. The Federation's entire technological superiority was meaningless against the Void Swarm. Your people fight wars with rules, formations, and predictable tactics, Day continued. We learn to fight them like the monsters they are using whatever methods produce results, regardless of how civilized beings might judge our actions. The comparison hung in the air like a physical presence, as everyone in the room began to understand the fundamental difference between conventional galactic warfare and the kind of absolute brutality required to face humanity. Greatest enemy, you became something that could hunt them effectively. Yaek said slowly, his voice filled with awe and terror, as he realized what he was really looking at. This human was not just a survivor. He was an apex predator specifically adapted to combat cosmic horror. Commander Yaek stared at Master Chief Day Park with a mixture of growing amazement and deep terror as everything he had been taught about primitive species crumbled around him like a house made of cards. The Federation intelligence reports had completely failed to identify what humanity was truly capable of when pushed to their absolute limits. The alien commander had conquered dozens of worlds and fought against the most dangerous enemies the galaxy had to offer, but he had never encountered anything quite like this human who radiated quiet menace, despite his relatively small size and primitive equipment. Prove it, Yaek said finally, his voice much quieter than it had been at the beginning of their confrontation. It was no longer a challenge, born from arrogance, but a genuine request from someone whose entire understanding of warfare and survival was being fundamentally altered. The request hung in the air like an explosive device waiting to detonate as everyone in the room understood that they were about to witness something that would change how the galactic community viewed Earth and its inhabitants forever. Day looked around the chamber with eyes that automatically cataloged every detail, the positions of personnel, the structural weak points in walls and ceiling, the locations of potential weapons, and the quickest routes to all available exits. It was an assessment he performed without conscious thought after decades of training and combat experience. I do not think that would be wise, Admiral Kim said quickly, her concern obvious to everyone present. Maybe we could arrange a controlled demonstration later somewhere with better safety protocols and proper containment procedures. The worry in her voice made several soldiers take additional steps backward. She had seen classified footage of what Master Chief Park could accomplish when he was truly unleashed, and this chamber was far too small and contained too many innocent people to serve as a safe testing ground for capabilities that bordered on supernatural. But Day shook his head slowly, his expression remaining calm and controlled. He needs to understand now, before he makes tactical decisions that will get good soldiers killed unnecessarily. He replied, while never taking his eyes off the alien commander. Your species judges everything by physical strength and technological superiority. Day continued, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had faced impossible odds and survived through pure determination. But humans learn to survive by being adaptable, creative, and absolutely ruthless when circumstances require it. The alien commander found himself nodding slowly as he began to grasp the deeper implications of what the human was explaining. The Federation had been approaching the Void Swarm crisis, using conventional military thinking against an enemy that required completely unconventional solutions. You do not fight like any civilized galactic species, Jayak observed. And for the first time since their confrontation began, it sounded like genuine respect rather than an insult or dismissal. You fight exactly like the Void, Swarm itself, using whatever methods work regardless of rules, honor or traditional tactical. Doctrine Day smiled for the second time during their encounter, and the expression was even less pleasant than his first attempt. Several experienced soldiers who knew his reputation took another step backward, while maintenance workers began quietly, moving toward emergency exits. Exactly, Commander Yaek, the human replied while studying the alien impressive armor and weapons with eyes that seemed to be calculating weak points and potential countermeasures. Your Federation fights wars like elaborate chess games with proper formations, established rules, and predictable strategic patterns. The comparison made several galactic military officers who were observing through communication links feel uncomfortable as they realized how accurately the primitive human had assessed their standard operating procedures. We fight wars like knife fights in dark alleys where the only rule that matters is making sure you go home alive while your opponent does not. Day continued, his casual tone, making the violent comparison even more disturbing to civilized sensibilities. Admiral Kim felt her pulse racing as she watched the interaction between human and alien, knowing that this moment would determine whether Earth earned respect as an equal partner or was dismissed as too dangerous to work with. The political implications were staggering. The Federation has superior technology, advanced weapons, and overwhelming numerical advantages against most enemies, Day observed while beginning to circle around the increasingly nervous alien commander. But none of that matters when facing something that can adapt to and absorb your technological superiority. Jack's powerful legs felt unsteady as he tried to keep track of the human movements while processing the tactical implications of everything he was hearing. The Master Chief was describing fundamental flaws in Federation military doctrine that no one had been willing to acknowledge. What makes you think your primitive methods would be more effective than our advanced systems? The alien asked, though his voice lacked the confidence it had carried earlier in their conversation. Because we have already proven it works, Day replied simply. We eliminated a void swarm infestation using nothing but creativity, determination, and willingness to become something that could match their ruthlessness. The Federation has been losing entire star systems to these creatures for centuries. The human stopped directly in front of Yaek and looked up into his three eyes with an expression that made the 8-foot-tall warrior want to step backward, despite his size and strength advantages. Your armor looks impressive and expensive, Day said quietly while studying the energy patterns and defensive systems. But it would become a liability against enemies that can turn your own technology into weapons. What would you do when your protection becomes their advantage? Admiral. Kim realized she was holding her breath as she watched the alien commander. struggle with concepts that challenged everything the galactic community believed about warfare and survival. The Federation's entire military philosophy was based on technological superiority. I would adapt my tactics to compensate for the disadvantage, Yayak replied, though his voice carried less certainty than his words suggested. The alien was beginning to understand that facing the void swarm required more than simple tactical adjustments. Day nodded approvingly, as if the alien had given the correct answer to an important test question. But would you be willing to abandon everything you were taught about civilized warfare, he asked. Would you be prepared to become something that your own people might not recognize afterward? The question hit Yayak like a physical blow as he realized what the human was really asking. The Master Chief had paid a terrible personal price for his victory against cosmic horror and was warning that the same transformation would be required of others. That is what it takes to fight them effectively. Day continued, his voice carrying the weight of terrible experience. You have to be willing to become a monster yourself, because only monsters can hunt monsters successfully in their own territory. The alien. Commander stared at the human with new understanding as he finally grasped what Earth was really offering the galactic community. Not just additional troops or resources, but access to a completely different approach to warfare that might actually work against their greatest enemy. Show me. Yayak said quietly, his three hearts beating faster with anticipation and fear. I need to understand what my people are not prepared for so I can help them survive what is coming. The tension in the chamber shifted dramatically as understanding passed between the human warrior and the alien commander like electricity jumping between two conductors. The air itself seemed to crackle with new possibilities as both beings realized. They were witnessing the beginning of something that would change galactic history forever. Commander Yayak straightened his massive shoulders and looked directly at Master Chief Day Park with respect that was evident in every gesture and movement. His entire demeanor had transformed from arrogant dismissal to genuine acknowledgement of meeting an equal or perhaps even a superior. I owe you a formal apology, Master Chief Park Yayak said, using the human proper rank and title for the first time. Since arriving on Earth, his voice carried the weight of someone whose fundamental beliefs about the universe had been completely overturned in the span of a single conversation. The alien commander continued, his voice growing stronger as he accepted the new reality. And I owe your entire species a debt of gratitude that the Galactic Federation may never be able to properly repay. We have been fighting the Void Swarm for more than 3 centuries, losing entire star systems and billions of lives. Yayak paused as terrible memories of defeats and evacuations flashed through his mind. Yet you faced them alone on your own world and achieved victory using nothing but primitive weapons. Courage and tactical thinking that our best military strategists never considered. Day nodded once, accepting the apology with the same calm dignity he had shown throughout their entire confrontation. We are not looking for gratitude or recognition. Commander, he replied quietly, we are looking for an opportunity to help end this war permanently before it consumes everything we value. The human warrior continued, his voice carrying quiet determination. But we do it using our methods with our tactics and our understanding of what actually works against these creatures. Or we do not participate at all in your galactic conflict. Admiral Kim stepped forward, sensing the crucial moment to cement the alliance that could save both Earth and the wider galactic community. What Master Chief Park represents is just the beginning of what humanity can contribute to this war effort, she said diplomatically. The Admiral gestured toward the other soldiers who were still watching the proceedings with mixtures of awe and professional interest. We have thousands of personnel with similar training experience and, most importantly, the psychological preparation necessary to face cosmic horror. What exactly do they possess that makes them different from our own warriors? Yayak asked, genuinely curious now rather than dismissive. His entire perspective on primitive species had undergone a complete revolution during this single encounter. They absolutely refuse to surrender. Admiral Kim replied with obvious pride in her voice. Human soldiers will continue fighting, long after any rational being would recognize the hopelessness of their situation and seek terms for honorable surrender. She continued her explanation while watching the alien commander face for signs of understanding. They will use weapons that barely function, employ tactics that should be impossible according to military doctrine, and rely on pure, stubborn determination to win battles. They have no logical right to survive. Ek looked around the room at the assembled humans with completely new understanding and growing appreciation. These were not primitive warriors to be dismissed, protected, or carefully managed. These were apex predators who had climbed to the top of their world food chain through sheer bloody-minded persistence and creative violence. The Federation Council will need to hear about this development immediately, the alien commander said slowly, as the full implications of what he had learned began to sink in. Our entire strategic approach to the Void Swarm crisis may need to undergo fundamental revision. He continued, his voice gaining strength as new possibilities began forming in his tactical mind. We have been attempting to fight them using superior technology, coordinated fleet actions, and conventional military doctrine. But perhaps what we actually need is superior ruthlessness and tactical unpredictability. Admiral Kim felt a surge of hope as she realized that their most dangerous and classified operative had successfully convinced the Galactic representative that humanity deserved respect as equal partners rather than junior members requiring protection. Day extended his hand toward the alien commander in the traditional human gesture of mutual respect and partnership. After a moment of hesitation, Yaek reached out with his own massive hand and grasped the offered appendage carefully. The alien grip was physically stronger, but the human grip was steadier and carried the quiet confidence of someone who had faced absolute horror and emerged victorious through methods that civilized minds could barely comprehend. "Welcome to the war," Commander Jaek Day said quietly as they shook hands, sealing an alliance that would fundamentally alter how the galactic community approached their greatest existential threat. "Now let us work together to save the galaxy from complete consumption." The handshake lasted only a few seconds, but everyone present understood they were witnessing a historic moment that would be remembered for generations. The primitive species that the Federation had considered barely worth protecting had just proven they might be the key to winning an unwinnable war. Jaek released the human hand and stepped back to address the entire room with new authority and purpose. "I will personally recommend to the Federation High Command that Earth be granted full partnership status in our military alliance," he announced formally. The alien commander continued his declaration while looking directly at Admiral Kim. "Your people will receive access to our most advanced weapons technology, defensive systems, and strategic intelligence, but more importantly, we will learn from your unconventional approaches to warfare." Admiral Kim felt tears forming in her eyes as she realized that humanity had just earned its place among the stars, not as subjects or junior partners, but as equals whose unique capabilities were essential for galactic survival. "Master Chief Park will serve as my personal advisor on anti-void swarm tactics," Yaek continued. "The Federation military leadership needs to understand what we have been doing wrong and how human methods can be integrated with our existing capabilities." Day nodded acceptance of the new responsibility while maintaining the same calm expression he had worn throughout their entire confrontation. "I will need access to your tactical databases, fleet deployment information, and detailed reports on previous engagements with Void Swarm forces," the alien commander agreed, immediately realizing that the human expertise was worth more than all the advanced technology the Federation could offer. "You will have complete access to everything we know about the enemy, plus transportation to any world where active fighting is occurring." As the formal negotiations continued around them, both warriors understood that they had formed more than just a military alliance. They had created a partnership between two very different approaches to survival that might finally tip the balance in humanity's favor. The galaxy was about to learn that sometimes the most primitive solutions were exactly what civilized warfare needed to defeat enemies that existed beyond the boundaries of rational tactical doctrine. The Void Swarm had never encountered anything like human creativity and determination, and they were about to discover why that was a very dangerous oversight that would cost them everything they had consumed across 3 centuries of galactic conquest.